Hey everybody, welcome back to the Vinyl Addict for another episode of Vinyl Fetishes. We've been away a little bit, getting our ducks in order. We're doing another one of our 100 albums that must be in your collection. We're doing the 100 albums that aren't the obvious choices, but are significant to you, perhaps definitely significant to me. And I'm really excited because today we are talking about Hüsker Dü's 1984 album, Zen Arcade. Their masterpiece. Many people think of this as the greatest punk rock album of all time. Some people will tell you that it's the greatest album of all time. It comes out July 1st on 1984 on SST Records. Is the first non-West Coast California band. SST in 1984 is pretty much dominated by Black Flag, but the Minutemen were also on SST. But this was a double record from this amazing trio. I had gotten into this band with their first, I guess, live record that came out 2 years earlier called Land Speed Record. That was just a lot of loud, fast rules. It was, it was the era of hardcore. Punk was evolving in the early 80s from kind of the British punk to the LA hardcore scene to being something sometimes called post-punk that brings in other genres, but just a lot of screaming, yelling, and playing as fast as you can. That's what Land Speed Record was. But, Hüsker Dü is this great trio that, that, a lot of people still listen to the music of Bob Mould. He's still making music. Grant Hart is still making music. Grant Hart was the drummer. Bob Mould was the guitarist. Greg Norton is still with us. He's battling cancer right now. So here's to that amazing bass player from Hüsker Dü, Greg Norton. But in the early 80s, it was just like la 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 la. And then early in 1984, they put out this single, a cover of the Byrds' 8 Miles High, which was kind of cool because, there was supposed to be this rejection in punk rock of all things hippie and all things 60, and, the 60s Peace and Love epic was just a lot of wanking, and punk rock was kind of a rejection of that. And here they put out this great single that is this amazing cover of this, the Bird song that I got at the record bar. I think I got it at the record bar at Atlantic Small in Atlanta. And that was shortly followed up by this thing, which is a concept album. I mean, when it came out, I remember reading about it in Maximum Rock and Roll magazine, which is this great punk rock zine that we all read in the 80s and early 90s, describing it as the punk version of Quadrophenia, of the Who's Quadrophenia. And in fact, it pretty closely maps that story. There is a narrative here. It's not super simple to follow, but basically it's about a kid who hates his life, who runs away from home, joins a Hare Krishna cult, tries to join the military, tries to get a job, hangs out with a lot of people who are dying of drugs, and there's a story, but what it really is the sonic explosion of this trio, playing all the instruments. Des from Black Flag sings back up on one of the more punk songs. But it opens up with something I learned today, which is just this explosion of this sound from this band, and ends with a 14-minute epic, instrumental epic called Reoccurring Dreams. And in between, there are songs that are less than a minute. There's a couple of songs that are less than a minute in true punk loud fast rules. There are some songs that, have keyboards in it and are a little bit more evocative of 60s music. It was quite different when it came out. I mean, it really kind of shook things up. It inspired label mates, the Minutemen, to do a double record, which we've already talked about, double nickels on the dime. And in 1984, there was kind of this thing that was happening between Hüsker Dü, the Minutemen, and the Replacements, who we'll talk about later, who had a very important album out that summer of 1984 that really fashions what we now refer to as indie rock, or the alternative rock scene, or post-punk. It really comes from this nexus of all this kind of music that's rooted in punk rock, that's dissonant and loud and fast, and songs are short, and brings all this energy. This album was recorded mostly all in first takes. There wasn't a lot of rehearsal. There was not a lot of overdubbing. It's pretty much live in the studio. They recorded in LA at SST Studios. It was mixed all in one long 40-hour session and then put out very quickly. And that was kind of the idea of punk rock. The punk rock ethos at the time is you want to capture the moment. You want to capture the moment that you're in because it's fleeting. And 5 minutes later, you'll be into something else. In fact, the album that came out after this one, New Day Rising, which I love, 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 and it's probably the most successful of the Hüsker Dü records, I'm guessing, is much more evolved, kind of like, the Beatles. Each record is different. New Day Rising sounds a lot different than this one. I saw them on this tour. I saw them on the New Day Rising tour at 688 in Atlanta, and I have some snapshots of that. But I saw them in early 85 at a club in Hoboken, New Jersey called Maxwell's, where they just played this whole album from front to back, and it was insane. It was so explosive. Just the energy of these three guys, the music that they could create. And it's kind of really hard to describe music like this. It's like trying to talk about jazz. There's the story of this kid, which you can follow or not follow if you want to, but there's just this incredible collision of sound that is just explosive. And one of the reasons I want to talk about this record is, as far as I know, you can't get it anymore. That it's out of print, and the CDs, it's streaming, and I'll include the link. Streaming on Spotify, but you can't get this physical thing, this double album with all the important lyrics, and I mean, it is just, it's just a moment in time. The shift between the punk rock underground that was happening Los Angeles, but also Minneapolis and everywhere. Chicago had a scene. DC had an amazing scene with groups like Minor Threat. There were all these little scenes that were happening around the country. We certainly had one in Atlanta that was starting to turn into something that was more accessible. I'll just say that. Nobody wants to say it was a sellout, but was starting to reach a wider audience thanks to this idea of alternative rock, or something going against the Culture Club, which is what was on the radio in 1984 and on MTV. It is fast music and furious, and I remember sitting in the car with some of these songs on a mixtape with a friend of mine, Mary Patari, who has left us, and screaming the lyrics to these songs as loud as we could in the parking lot of a punk rock bar, just screaming, because this so captured. And, that the beauty of this record is that it does what Quadrophenia did 10 years earlier. Quadrophenia is, 1974. Zen Arcade is 1984. Quadrophenia was meant to capture the teen angst and the experience of being a young person and not being able to make sense of the world and feeling like you're out. I don't know if it was meant to be a shout out to Quadrophenia, but there's a song on here called Standing by the Sea that opens with the sound of the sea, which is something that's a reoccurring theme on the Who's Quadrophenia. So they fit very well together. It's insane that they're only 10 years apart from each other. I mean, it's like saying 2024 and 2014. Like, there doesn't seem very much difference between the sound then. The sound of 74 and the sound of 84 were a million miles apart, but yet there was this consistent theme of young angst, raging, not fitting in, wanting the sound of rebellion, wanting the sound of smashing things, wanting the sound of pure adrenaline rush. It's just hard. There's a group of us. It's hard to articulate. There's a group of us. I was 20 when this record came out, 20 years old, and it spoke to me, and there's a whole generation who latched onto this album as their heartbeat, as their rage, as their expression of how do I fit into this insane world that I live in. So I wanted to include Zen Arcade in our 100. Find it. Be willing to play it very loud. Be willing to annoy people all around you, and your body will shake. I love this album so much. Hüsker Dü had a bunch of great albums. Made albums all the way to 1987, and then they kind of split in different directions. And Bob Mould has had the most successful career of the three. He's made a lot of great records, and he's still out touring. But this thing is a wonderful moment in time of my youth, of the history of punk rock and indie rock and alternative rock and post-punk and everything like that. Zen Arcade should be in your collection. Should be in your collection. One of the 100 albums that should be in your collection. And if you can find this little gem, probably worth some money now. Hüsker Dü doing 8 Miles High. It's worth it. All right, that's that one. Hey, we're going to get into something really different next week. We're going to go back into the world of world music and talk about another record from the 80s. We're stuck in the 80s for a little bit, I guess, that really opened up some doors that created some massive social change in a country called South Africa. We're going to talk about the Indestructible Beat of Soweto, the various artists' album that really brought a lot of global attention to apartheid in South Africa. We've got to talk about that. Indestructible Beat of Soweto next time on Vinyl Fetish. Until then, this record matters. Hüsker Dü matters. Zen Arcade matters. You matter. Let's talk about it.